Hello and welcome to Sustainable City Network's presentation of a webcast that will feature the sustainability programs and accomplishments of the City of Seattle, Washington. Seattle's Climate Action Plan calls for a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions primarily through changes in transportation, land use, building energy, and solid waste management, with the goal of becoming carbon neutral by the year 2050. In this webinar, Jill Simmons, Director of Seattle's Office of Sustainability and Environment, will discuss the climate action plans and other Seattle sustainability initiatives. My name is Dick McGrain with Sustainable City Network, publishers of the online trade magazine SCityNetwork.com. Along with webinars like the one you're viewing today, we also produce a weekly email newsletter, a quarterly print magazine, conferences, and other interactive content specifically designed for civic leaders and professionals involved in the day-to-day challenge of building sustainable communities. We reach readers in 50 states and throughout Canada with quality and timely information on sustainability, best practices, products, and services. We're thrilled that more than 800 leaders from cities and counties across the nation have registered for today's presentation, which is sponsored by Crescent Electric Supply Company and Stoneway Electric Supply. Crescent Electric is the 10th largest electrical distributor in the U.S., and Stoneway Electric, a Crescent company, serves the Northwest with 18 stocking locations in Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webcast. Jill Simmons is the director of the Seattle Office of Sustainability and Environment. Prior to becoming director in 2010, Jill served as OSE's Climate Protection Program Manager and worked in the city's financial department as a fiscal and policy analyst for Seattle's green initiatives. She has also worked on community development and sustainability initiatives as an associate program officer at the Northwest Area Foundation. Jill holds a law degree and a master's degree in public administration from the University of Washington. So now, Jill, please begin.
Thank you very much, Dick, and thanks to the Sustainable Cities Network for giving me the opportunity to talk about sustainability in Seattle today. I look forward to giving a quick overview of Seattle's work. I thought I'd start first with a quick outline of the presentation that I'm planning to give today. I'll start with a quick history of sustainability in Seattle, move on to an overview of my office and the work that we do, provide a deep dive into the Seattle Climate Action Plan kind of give a good sense of what that says and what it sets out for us to do, and then spend the end of my presentation providing a few spotlights on some of our sustainability programs. Certainly not the entirety of the work we do here in Seattle, and I'd welcome any questions at the end about other programs you may be aware of that I don't talk about today. And then finally finish with a little bit of what's on the horizon, particularly about how Seattle is working on measuring and reporting on our progress in sustainability. So I'll start with a quick history of Seattle sustainability. Many of you know the iconic landmark of the Space Needle in Seattle, and that was built for the 1962 World's Fair, which was held here in Seattle. And it was interesting, recently we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the World's Fair, and in doing so I uncovered a poster that we had put up, or that our electric company, Seattle City Light, had put up, that bragged that Seattle was the largest consumer of electricity in the nation. And at that time, in 1960, that was heralded as a great advancement in modernization and in technology, and was a sign of a city of the future. You know, not surprisingly, that looks pretty backwards now today. And if you flash forward a mere 10 years to the early 1970s, Seattle started to become a little bit concerned about our dependence on electricity, and in particular about what new energy sources or electricity sources we might have to be looking to, nuclear, coal, etc. And so in the early 70s, we began our electricity and water conservation programs, and in the 90s also started to do recycling programs. So where we sit today here in 2014, we have decades of commitment to conservation in our community and a really strong conservation ethic, which has really created a foundation that allows us to continued this good work. In addition, in the 1990s, Washington State passed a growth management plan that really was set out the framework for how we as a state and as a community want to grow. And one of the requirements of that plan was to create a comprehensive plan for the city. Our first comprehensive plan was finished in the early 90s, and the theme of that plan, or the vision that's set out in that plan, was titled Towards a Sustainable Seattle. And so even in our planning from the 90s on, sustainability and sort of the sustainability ethic has been woven into our planning and our work. And a key piece of that comprehensive plan that has guided much of our investments in our land use and transportation infrastructure was an urban village and urban center strategy that calls for concentrating growth in housing, jobs, amenities, and services in urban villages and urban centers, so that we create the kind of complete communities that we see and want. In the 2000s, we started to continue to really focus in on climate change as a key issue with the city. Many of you were probably aware Mayor Nichols, a previous mayor, created the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, which called on mayors from around the country to agree to the emission reduction targets of the Kyoto Protocol. And he felt it was really important for cities to stand up and say, we are committed to addressing climate change and to meeting the targets of the Kyoto Protocol, even if the United States was unwilling to sign on. And at that time, we also created our first climate action plan back in 2006. In addition, Seattle City Light, building on its decades of commitment to conservation, became the first large utility in the nation to become carbon neutral. We were fortunate Seattle City Light has a large amount of electricity that comes from hydropower, but it also began a commitment to investing in conservation and renewables to meet all load growth. And then the small portion of fossil fuel-based electricity they now purchase offsets for. Also, over the last decade, we've instituted mandatory recycling and food and yard waste collection. We just recently made it mandatory for food packaging to be recyclable or compostable. And I'll be talking about this later, we recently passed a requirement that multifamily and large commercial buildings report and benchmark and report their energy use to the city. And we also passed a plastic bag ban recently. So that's a really quick flyby of some of the key milestones that mark our progression in environmental sustainability. This is a quick snapshot of many of the plans that we have here at the city that guide our sustainability work. You'll see there's climate and energy. Obviously, the Seattle Climate Action Plan is one of those. Seattle City Light has a conservation plan, as well as I mentioned, a renewable energy plan. We have a resource conservation management plan. In transportation and land use, we have modal plans that guide our investments in transit, pedestrian, bicycle infrastructure, as well as the comprehensive plan continues to lay out the vision for our city going forward. We have a food action plan that really looks at how we can enhance equity and availability of fresh food for our community. In the area of trees, we have an urban forest stewardship plan. Under waste, we have a zero waste strategy. And under water, we have a green stormwater infrastructure strategy. We are fortunate right now that water availability is not a huge concern. However, stormwater and water quality are big factors for the city. Now I'll give you a quick overview on my office. Seattle was one of the first communities in the nation to create an Office of Sustainability and Environment. We're a relatively small shop, and we deliver policies and programs to address Seattle's environmental challenges. And our focus is really on meeting the city's environmental goals while also creating vibrant communities and building shared prosperity. And I always say we're not looking for the wool sweater approaches. We're looking for approaches that really make people excited about the community that we're creating and also meeting our environmental goals. Our office does not work on everything that the city does around environmental sustainability. Our current focus areas, just to go over them quickly, we're focused on climate protection and resilience, high-performance buildings, green stormwater infrastructure, electric vehicle readiness, district energy systems, green workforce development, food systems, urban forestry, and performance monitoring. And I'll touch a little bit on many of these as I move forward. Sort of how we approach our work, there's kind of three main buckets that our office works on. I jokingly often call us the cat herders and sustainability pushers. Cat herder piece is much about helping to coordinate across departments in the city, coordinate with the community to make sure that we're all moving forward and advancing our environmental goals. And the sustainability pusher part is much like the first piece here on the slide. Break new ground. Our office does a lot of research and development for the next generation of environmental policies or programs the city might want to move forward with. And so we test new approaches, we often pilot, we do demonstration projects, and then as the proof of concept moves forward, we bring it to scale. And on the side, you'll see a couple of programs mentioned, and I'll touch on all of these a little bit later in the program. In addition, our office is really focused on creating on-the-ground results and measurable impact. So we are very focused on being able to show what these programs deliver in terms of community outcomes. And then lastly, a major focus of our office is what we call charting the path forward, and that's really about creating the action plans for achieving Seattle's environmental goals. And I'll dive in depth here on the Climate Action Plan, but last year we also completed the Urban Forestry Stewardship Plan, the Food Action Plan, and the Resource Conservation Management Plan. So there's a number of plans that we coordinate the development of. And at the bottom you'll see a link to the Office of Sustainability's 2013 annual report. I'd encourage you to look at that if you're interested in finding out more about our office and the work that we do. So to dive into the Climate Action Plan here quickly, as Dick mentioned, recently Seattle set a goal of being carbon neutral by 2050. And the way that we define that is zero net emissions by 2050. So we recognize that it is unlikely, highly, highly unlikely, Seattle would ever be a zero emissions community. There's always going to be a little bit of emissions in our community, and we would expect to become carbon neutral, we will need to do some sort of offsetting. However, the Climate Action Plan is not, but the current Climate Action Plan is not focused on being carbon neutral. It's really focused on how do we get the most emission reductions from our community as possible, and we will focus on what's required in terms of making up that last increment of emissions as we get closer to that longer-term goal. The plan looks at both how we reduce greenhouse gas emissions and how we prepare for the likely impacts of climate change. And again, has the framework of we want to do those things while building vibrant communities, while creating economic opportunity, and while enhancing the equity of our community. So I'll touch briefly about our approach with the Climate Action Plan. It's very much an integrated approach, and want to be very clear, the Seattle Climate Action Plan is not an implementation plan in the sense that it is not a detailed, very specific, itemized list of things we're going to do. It is very much a vision-setting document and creates the framework and the goals and the direction that is then carried out through many of our other implementation plans, the transportation plans, building energy, waste, preparedness plans, etc. It also, we lay out what we believe is the necessary coordinated strategy of actions. We don't believe that we can achieve our climate goals with a pick-your-own-menu approach. Many of the actions here complement one another and really need each other in order to drive the emissions reductions. And so it really is looking at a strategy of actions, not a menu of things that the city could or couldn't do. And then, as I mentioned, it also really, getting it done on the ground requires working through other city plans, and we're helping use the Climate Action Plan to drive the actions that get into those plans. Quick overview of the plan itself. There are 4 chapters. The first is focused on reducing emissions. And there we focused in on the emission sectors where we felt that the city government or local communities have the greatest potential for impact. There are lots of emission sources in communities, but we felt local government had the greatest sphere of influence over emissions from road transportation and land use, emissions in building energy, and emissions in waste. There are other sectors of emissions, certainly industry is an example, air travel, et cetera. And we do talk about those in the Climate Action Plan, and I'll mention them later. But in terms of focusing cities' efforts and the city actions, we focused on transportation, energy, and waste. In addition, we have a chapter on preparing for climate impacts. Our first Climate Action Plan back in 2006 mentioned climate preparedness and the reality of climate impacts, but didn't have a coordinated strategy for preparing. Our new climate action plan does have lay out a strategy and an action plan for how we as a community will be preparing for the impacts of climate at the same time what we're trying to reduce emissions. And then two other chapters. First is what others are doing, and this again is really focused on those emission sectors that I mentioned where the city doesn't have a huge amount of influence, but others in our community do. So for example, the freight community, air, travel, and industry. And there, while the city doesn't have a lot of work, for example, our port is doing a lot of really good work to help to improve the climate impacts of our freight. So we've wanted to highlight what else is happening in our community and what else can be done. And then the last chapter is focused on what you can do, and what we mean by that is what residents can do to help us, because we recognize the city could do everything in its power and we still it wouldn't be enough. So this really is a community effort, and we need to be drawing on all aspects of our community to move this work forward. Focusing in on the actions around what the city government plans to do, we broke them into two groups. The first are actions to be implemented by 2015, and those are actions where we're really aiming at piloting new ideas, testing approaches, and also laying foundation for the longer-term actions. We recognize we're not going to solve this problem by 2015, but we also recognize if we don't get some things done now, we won't be on a trajectory to meet our long-term 2050 goals. In addition, we have a section of actions which we call actions to be implemented by 2030. And this is, again, recognizing we did a fairly exhaustive look at what will be necessary to achieve our climate goals. And those actions are ones that we realize will take time to implement. We're not going to do them within the next 3 years or 2 years, but are essential for us achieving our community and climate goals. And we want to be clear about where we need to be headed so that we can be thinking about how we move in that direction. I'm going to quickly walk through the three main emission sectors or focuses of our climate action plan and talk about our strategy, and then also talk about our preparedness efforts. So the first section, as I mentioned, is transportation and land use. And the way that we oriented our climate action plan is we started with a vision, a 2030 vision. What do we want our community to look like in terms of transportation and land use outcomes in 2030? And there we said we want frequent transit service and bike lanes to crisscross the city. We want walking, biking, transit to be the easiest ways to get around. And we want the majority of our residents to live in vibrant neighborhoods where they have jobs, housing, services, and amenities. That's really the vision of what we think our community needs to look like to be climate friendly. And to do that in the transportation section, we have three buckets of actions, or three main strategies. The first is transportation choices. The second is complete communities. And the third is economic signals, and I'll touch briefly on each of those. So transportation choices obviously are things around infrastructure, bike infrastructure, pedestrian infrastructure, transit infrastructure, providing the ability for our residents and businesses to easily move around our city. Complete communities is focused on our urban form and the idea that we really want people to be able to live close to work or close to services or to amenities, and that we need to be looking at what kind of community are we creating. Is it one where people do not need to rely on the car for everything? And then the last group is economic signals, and there we're really talking about those things that help to provide some price signal that helps people make the right choice. So primarily in those buckets are things like parking pricing, parking requirements, and road pricing. And the reason that we've created this sort of gear image was we felt very strongly in our process that you can't have one without the other of these buckets. You can't create transportation choices if the land uses around them are insufficient to support that demand. Similarly, you can't create dense, vibrant communities if you still have to get around with an automobile. So they really are not, it's a chicken and egg problem where we need to be moving forward with those together and in concert. And similarly, economic signals, you don't want to lead with those. If you don't have the transportation choices to help people make other choices, or you don't have a complete community, leading with economic signals is really more of a hindrance on affordability than producing any sort of climate outcomes. In building energy, again, we had a 2030 vision looking at building energy information that's available and understandable as the MPG rating on our car. We want most buildings in Seattle to have reached an energy upgrade, and that all buildings are achieving a basic level of energy performance. And that Seattle buildings are powered by a portfolio of renewable, low-carbon solutions, or energy sources, excuse me. We're fortunate, as I mentioned, to have carbon-neutral electricity, but we recognize that there are lots of uses for low-carbon or no-carbon electricity, including our transportation system. And so we want to continue to pursue other clean energy sources. And in terms of strategies, and under this bucket, again, it's a complementary bucket of strategies, starting with information. Mentioned we want folks to understand how their buildings perform, and what they can do to improve the energy efficiency of their building. But we also recognize information's rarely sufficient to spur action, and so another bucket of strategies is around incentives and assistance. What utility incentives, what assistance is necessary to make the business case and to motivate people to take action. And we really plan to lead with those first two, information and incentives. But we recognize eventually we will need to evolve towards performance requirements that, again, if we want all buildings to achieve a basic level of energy efficiency, there will be a point at which we need to mandate what that is. It won't happen tomorrow, but we want to evolve towards that type of building energy performance. And then lastly, again, recognizing that we need to constantly not only be looking at how our buildings perform in energy, but what is the supply, the type of energy we're putting into our buildings, and continuing to expand to have low carbon and renewable energy sources that power our buildings. In waste, Seattle has had a long history of waste reduction and has a zero waste strategy. Our vision is that overall we're producing significantly less waste than we are today, and of the remaining waste, 70% of it is recycled or composted. Our strategies under here are around waste reduction and product stewardship, so that's the piece of generate less waste, aggressive recycling and composting programs, and then also focusing on how we decrease the climate impact of collections, processing, and disposal. And then, as I mentioned, we also had a section on preparing for impacts, and this really stems from, we recognize, not only are we seeing impacts across the country and across the world around climate change, but that even if we stopped producing greenhouse gases tomorrow, we've probably bought ourselves a certain amount of climate change, and so we as a city and a community need to be prepared. Our vision here is that the city is continuing to plan for a changing climate and is using the best available science. For us, it was really important to acknowledge that climate impacts, you can't identify them at a point in time and say we know exactly what's going to happen. Science is constantly evolving and becoming better, and so a commitment to an adaptive planning process and really continually striving for the best available science to guide our decisions was a key principle of our work here. We also want a big focus on city infrastructure and services, making sure they're planned, built, and managed to adapt to the future climate conditions. And then a focus on ecosystem integrity and making sure that our work helps to enhance the resilience of our natural systems and to enhance our reliance on ecosystem services. In these buckets, you'll see below we have a number of strategies, one around assessment and planning, as I mentioned. Again, that continual commitment to adaptive management and to using best available science. A focus on actions around making sure our natural systems are able to adapt to the changes. We're fortunate that both Seattle City Light and Seattle Public Utilities have been leaders in climate preparedness for many, many years and have really focused on what they need to understand about their utility systems. It makes sense here in Seattle, both our water system and our electric system are highly dependent on water and snowpack, so they definitely feel that they need to be thinking ahead about what changes might be happening and how it would impact their ability to supply electricity or water. There's another suite of strategies focused on land use in the built environment. We, as a coastal city, are obviously concerned about sea level rise, but we're also concerned about precipitation and temperature changes. And as anyone knows who's been to Seattle, it rains a lot here. However, what the best science is telling us now is we probably will continue to get the same amount of rain, but it's going to come in very different ways, and that could impact flooding and other pieces, so that's a big focus of our work. And then lastly, community preparedness. We recognize that, and it's been borne out in every natural disaster we've seen in recent times, that the folks who are going to be hardest hit by the impacts of climate change are those that are least prepared to adapt. And so we want a pretty significant focus on how do we help vulnerable communities be prepared and make sure that we have the suite of services that are necessary to help our communities. For example, Seattle has a very temperate climate, and very few of our buildings have air conditioning. Very, very few of our homes have air conditioning. But as temperatures increase, we need to be thinking about the potential impacts to our vulnerable communities who don't have air conditioning in their homes. In addition, so that's the overview of our kind of the substance of the Climate Action Plan. In addition, we as we move forward to implementation, we are continuing obviously to work on our city actions, but we also want to be having ongoing conversations with the community about our work. So we're just kicking off, and in fact today, this afternoon, is our first forum, quarterly forums to talk with the community about the Climate Action Plan. And our hope here is that it enables us to have an ongoing and deeper dialogue with folks who are very interested in what the city is doing and very interested in taking action in their spheres of influence. We're working with community volunteers to help set the agenda, and the purpose really is to provide ongoing feedback and exchange that I think will help us learn as we implement the Climate Action Plan and identify opportunities for community to step up and take action. Speaking of stepping up and taking action, one program that we have that we've enhanced this year is called the Community Climate Projects. And this program, we're in our third year of implementation. It provides up to $10,000 to community organizations to do projects that engage residents in reducing climate impacts. And we focused it on the following areas that you can see on your screen: home energy use, getting around, transportation, food choices, buying stuff, waste, and really are asking for community organizations, grassroots groups, clusters of neighbors, we're pretty flexible about what it looks like, to come to us with their best ideas about how can we deliver on-the-ground impact and help residents make good climate-friendly choices. So you see some pictures here of some examples of some of our previous projects. We've had a lot of projects focused on biking. Two of them, for example, one was focused on helping women commuters feel more comfortable biking to and from work, and it was really focused on identifying barriers that women might feel about biking. At least in Seattle, the majority of bike commuters are males, and so it was really targeted on how do we help women feel more comfortable at work. Another biking program we had was a focus on low-income biking, and the program provided both bicycle repair training and free bikes to low-income families. And then another piece you'll see there, the Smiling Kids, another one of our projects was focused on low-waste lunch boxes and really helping parents understand how to create less waste when they pack lunches, and also to give advice on healthy food choices. So we are actually just starting in March 3rd, going to be releasing our third round of these climate projects. And we really think that it's a great way to partner with the community. City government doesn't always have the best their pulse on the ground of what residents are interested in doing, and this is a way for us to partner with those organizations to deliver and help residents. So quickly, I'm going to kind of change a little bit, move away from the Climate Action Plan and our climate engagement, and give a few pretty rapid-fire spotlights on some of our sustainability programs. There's certainly not everything that the city does, and there's a number of great programs that I didn't have the time to spotlight here. But hopefully it will give you a little bit of a sense of what we're doing and the scale and scope of what the city is working on. And I also encourage you to ask any other questions if there's a specific program I don't touch on here that you're interested in and want to know more about. Though I should clarify, I can't promise I'll have the answer, but I can promise to get back to you. So the first one I'll mention is our Energy Benchmarking and Reporting Program. This is a program we started about 3 years ago. Seattle is one of just 3 cities in the nation to adopt a requirement. At the time, now there's more than a dozen. But at the time, we were one of the first cities in the nation to adopt a requirement that non-residential buildings and multifamily buildings, 20,000 square feet or higher, track their energy performance and annually report it to the city. We use EPA's Energy Portfolio Manager for this program, and as have all the cities around the country that are working on this. I'm very pleased to say that after a lot of work, Seattle has the highest compliance rates in the nation. More than 95% of the required buildings reported their 2012 data. And so what this has provided is not only a great source of information for us to communicate with specific building owners about how their buildings are performing, but also a phenomenal data set that allows us to understand what the general energy performance of our building, our non-residential and multifamily building stock is. We just completed an analysis the end of last year of our 2012 data, and what that analysis showed is that Seattle buildings as a whole perform better than average compared to the nation, but that there's still a huge amount of room, room for improvement. And for example, one thing that it showed is even if the worst performing buildings improve their energy performance even to just average levels, total annual bill savings would surpass $55 million, and annual energy use would decline by 25%. So for us, it really underscored that while, of course, we want everyone to move as close as they can to being an Energy Star rated building, that's not necessary to see big savings, and that there is a role for minimum energy performance requirements that we will see a big impact in our climate program and in the energy performance of our building sector. Another energy-related program related to energy supply that I wanted to touch on is our work with district energy. For those who aren't familiar with what district energy systems are, it is essentially, certainly not new technology. Many district systems are hundreds of years old, but it's the idea of having a centralized energy plant that provides energy, heat, or cooling to a number of buildings. Therefore, each building doesn't need their own HVAC systems or their own furnaces or their own boilers. And it provides a very dynamic and flexible platform that allows you to change energy sources over time. You don't have to change out every boiler in buildings. You can just modernize or change the energy plant. So we're working right now with utility partners, developers, and community organizations to develop a district energy system in our South Lake Union neighborhood that uses waste heat from sewer lines and from data centers to heat the buildings in that neighborhood. And this is something that I'm very excited about. While our electricity is carbon neutral, there's a lot of good uses for electricity, and we're really pretty much sitting on large amounts of waste heat under our feet. We're sending huge amounts of waste heat at our buildings, and there's an opportunity to capture that and really provide the backbone of a district system. So in the case of data centers in particular, where we have several data centers downtown, we're actually expending electricity to cool the air to send it out the top of the building. And so we're working now to capture that heat, bring it into a district system, capture the heat from the sewer line, and really provide the majority of the heat to new buildings in a significant neighborhood. One last focus on energy programs. I mentioned earlier, I believe, that our Community PowerWorks program, that program provides energy upgrades to Seattle's residents and businesses. We were fortunate to receive a Better Buildings grant as part of the ERA funding that really helped us jumpstart this program, and to date, more than 3,000 families have upgrades completed or in progress. We've upgraded 1.5 million square feet of large commercial space through this program. Nearly 50 small businesses have received upgrades. And the energy and climate outcomes have been impressive. So we've saved more than 160,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. And I don't have it up here on the slide, but in our home program, the average energy savings that we've seen is 30% per home, with 10% of all participants saving more than 50%. So the amount of energy savings from this program has been quite staggering. And in addition, we had a very big focus on workforce and kind of the green economy through this program, and we're pleased that more than 1,200 people have worked on Community PowerWorks projects, and the majority of those are contractors and auditors. So you can see some pictures of sort of the work in progress and the happy customers of Community PowerWorks. Wanted to focus briefly. Seattle right now is aggressively working to implement its bike master plan, and the goal and the orientation of that plan is that we are building a network that puts every resident within a quarter mile of a bike facility. So meaning bike lanes, dedicated bike routes. trails, etc. So you'll see a couple of listed here, the strategies by which we're doing that. Greenways, which is the idea of identifying streets that are off main arterials but can be safe pathways and green pathways for bicycles and pedestrians. Protected bike lanes, bike parking, trails, a big focus on safe routes to school, and we are about to launch our bike share program as well here in Seattle. Turning to urban forestry for a bit, I wanted to highlight a very exciting public-private partnership that's been going on for a number of years with the goal of restoring 2,500 acres of Seattle's forested parklands. Seattle, you know, our nickname is the Emerald City, and yet the truth is we may not be very emerald in the future if we don't really have a dedicated focus on our urban forest, and in particular on our forested parklands where we have a significant problem with invasive species. So this effort, we partnered with nonprofits and community organizations, and the volunteers do the restoration work. They're involved in removing the invasive plants and in planting the natives. And to date, we have 1,000 acres in restoration. We've planted more than 150,000 trees. Volunteer hours are getting close to 700,000 in terms of the time that's spent on that. And we have 124 stewards, and those are community members who have committed to basically overseeing the stewardship of their plot of land or their piece of the park. And the amount of time and effort that those folks put into ensuring that we're not losing the ground on the acres we've restored is really staggering. And it's a wonderful example of how you can channel interest in community volunteerism and community give back to bring some really impressive results. And the last program I'll spotlight quickly is Fresh Bucks. Fresh Bucks is a program, and there's a number of these or several of these around the country, but the Fresh Bucks program started about 2 years ago. Our office started it, and it doubles the purchasing power of low-income families who are shopping at farmers markets. So it basically gives them a one-for-one match to their food stamp benefits up to a certain amount. So last year, it was the second year of the program. It was very exciting. The first year we started, we piloted it at 7 of Seattle's farmers markets. Last year, we were able to expand it, so it was available at every single farmers market in Seattle. And it brought more than 2,600 low-income shoppers to the farmers markets. And most exciting for us is that 1,200 of those had never shopped at a farmers market before. So in addition to bringing low-income families to farmers markets where they haven't been in the past, necessarily shopping, enabling them to access fresh local food. It also brought pretty significant economic impact to our local farmers. The additional incentive from the Fresh Bucks program brought in $140,000 into the local farmer market economy. So the last slide that I'll do here is on the horizon and talking a little bit about what work is ahead. And particularly focusing on what we're doing now to measure our progress towards our sustainability efforts and to think about how we take that information and move it forward. So the first I'll mention, many of you are probably aware of the STAR Community Framework. Seattle is one of 30 local communities that is piloting this program and participating in the pilot project and rating system. We're in the midst right now of rolling up our sleeves and collecting all of the information for the STAR Community Framework. It's a ton of information. It's a lot of work, but it's actually been an amazingly helpful process of really getting into the weeds and looking at what are our targets, what are we doing, what are the outcomes related to that across not only environmental programs but economic efforts and equity efforts as well. We're hoping to finish our assessment by mid this year, and a piece of the STAR Community Framework is that they then provide your city a rating. And of course, Seattle hopes for the 5-star rating given all of our work, but even if we didn't achieve that, it's been a very helpful process in setting a baseline from which we can move forward. That's a really deep dive. The STAR Community Framework will be a very deep dive in our work. A higher level dive or sort of look, our office is putting together the city's first environmental progress report, which will be a snapshot of what are all of the goals that Seattle has set around environmental sustainability and what is our progress to those goals. So the report is titled, or at least the working title is Moving the Needle, and it will look across transportation, land use, energy, water, waste, food, trees, what are all of the goals that we've set? Seattle has many, many, many environmental goals, and where are we and where might we want to go? We plan to release that report on Earth Day this year, and the information from both the Environmental Progress Report and from the STAR Community Framework will, we believe, provide a very well-rounded picture of how are we doing and where do we need to move forward. The city just recently had a transition in mayors, and our mayor is very interested in taking this information and working with city departments and with a community commission or advisory panel to really go over and figure out what should our 2015 environmental action agenda be, and announcing that as by the end of this year. And the focus there, again, it will not encompass everything that the city does around environmental sustainability. There's lots of work. But we hope to hone in specifically on, are there goals where we're really not measuring, we're not on pace? If they are, what are they and what should we be doing? Or are there places where we really think there's an opportunity for Seattle to lead and pave the way for a new type of policy or a new program? What are those, and how can we prioritize those in moving forward? So that, again, is going to be a big focus of this year and a big focus of my office and the city and the mayor's attention. And with that, I think I'm finished and would look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you, Jill. Now we have time to take some questions from the audience, and we already have some coming in, so we'll get right to them. The first one comes from Chris, and he would like to know what percentage of SCL's portfolio are offsets purchased for bundled, unbundled RECs, and does the city or SCL have an REC policy and cap?
Well, I cannot answer the entirety of that question, although I'd be happy to talk to Seattle City Light and get the specific thing about the RECs, RECs, renewable energy credits. I do not know enough about that to answer intelligently. I can say that Seattle City Light's portfolio is approximately 94% renewable at this point. So we're talking about a 6% of non-renewable energy sources in terms of what the offsets are. And of course, the majority of that portfolio is hydroelectricity. We're very fortunate to own our own dams, and so 90% of that comes from hydroelectricity, and then we have some wind and solar in the mix. I do not know about City Light's REC policy, but I'd be happy to provide that feedback and get an answer later on.
Okay. Next question, when was the office created and how many people work in the sustainability office?
Our office was created in 1999. Until about 2005, there were 4 people that worked here. Now we are about an office of 16, although it waxes and wanes, again, based on what we're working on at the time. And again, our office is primarily a policy kind of shop that works on developing programs, not implementing a lot of the programs. We work closely with a lot of our other departments that, for example, implement the energy conservation programs or waste reduction programs or transportation programs. So we are relatively small shop, but it's about 16.
Next question is, what other cities do you look at for their action plans?
Well, we're fortunate that there's a number of cities that are really leading the way in this arena. When we were preparing our climate action plan, we looked to many of the usual suspects: Vancouver, BC, Portland, Oregon, San Francisco. I'll move west to east here. We also looked at Austin has done a number of really interesting work in energy. So we looked at Austin, Minneapolis, Chicago, New York. New York's done a lot of great work around climate preparedness. We've been looking there. Miami, actually Florida, has done a lot of really great work around sea level rise. I'm sure I'm missing many really great cities, and my apologies if I don't mention yours, because there are a number of leaders across the country.
Okay. How do you get the sustainability vision into other plans for implementation? And for instance, did the mayor issue a directive?
So, that is a constant challenge in terms of how you move from being perceived of as a sideline effort or something that the Office of Sustainability needs to think about, we don't need to think about it. We have been fortunate now that we're going into our third mayor that's had a very strong focus on climate, and so it is become embraced by the city to in a large way about meeting our climate goals. And as a result, much of the goals that are laid out in the transportation plans, for example, really are complementary to the climate plan. So for example, about 5 years ago, our transportation department changed its vision and mission to moving people and goods, not moving cars. And so they've really embraced the multimodal approach, and we've worked closely with them to make sure that our climate goals and sort of what we're hoping to achieve in terms of emission reductions are well matched with their strategies. But it's been a really sort of both top-down but also bottom-up effort here in Seattle, and we have a population that expects this from its government. So it's been it's taken time though to integrate it in a really successful way, and there's always for room for improvement.
Okay, the next questioner asks, would you please talk about the process for building the visions?
Building the visions in terms of, I'm assuming this means building the visions around kind of what we want our community to look like in 2030. So I'll start with that, but actually maybe I'll take a step back and talk about the process of building the vision in terms of what goals we've set. And so, for example, the carbon neutral goal, I'll start there. That was really, it's interesting that the focus on carbon neutrality came out of really the community and some key leaders bringing that to the city and saying, Seattle has been a leader in climate for a long time. You can't stop in 2012. That had been the Kyoto Protocol target. You guys need to be thinking bigger, and we want you to be thinking around carbon neutrality. And so there was a series of community conversations around carbon neutrality and is this something we want? And that was primarily led by the City Council. That City Council made it their focus about figuring out what is the vision for our city. And they then adopted the goal of carbon neutrality through some community feedback, but also through their work in thinking about what we want to be as a city going forward. From that, we then we felt that creating that people and the community do not relate necessarily very well to metric tons of greenhouse gas reductions. And that if we continue to talk about climate in terms of that, we were going to lose people and have them not really understand what does this add up to at the end of the day in terms of what my community looks like. And so we worked with a couple of consultants and also through a community process to try and create actually pictures, and we have these on our website, of what a community would look like now and what it would look like in 2030 if we implemented what we see as greenhouse gas reduction policies. And we really wanted to create that picture in people's minds so that they didn't think about it as, oh, I've reduced X tons, but oh, this is what it means in terms of my level of service of biking. And so it was really a combination of both analytical work and pictures, actually visuals and trying to paint the picture and understand what it looked like, and then community conversations that came up with the vision of 2030 around transportation, building energy, waste, etc.
Okay, our next question comes in two parts, and the first one is, how do you enforce buildings to achieve performance requirements? And secondly, are there penalties that will be put in place if a building doesn't meet these requirements?
So I want to be very clear, we do not have building energy performance requirements now for existing buildings. We do have a very robust energy code, like many communities across the country, for new buildings or for major renovations, and there we do enforce it through inspections and permitting and requirements. We have not moved to an energy performance requirement for existing buildings, and quite frankly, I don't know how we're going to do it. we will see. But it would probably be similar to mandating audit requirements or mandating some level of energy performance. So our benchmarking program lays the groundwork for that, in that there's a requirement that buildings annually report to us their energy performance. And over time, we may institute requirements that every building needs to meet X level of energy performance. But I want to be clear, we're a long way from that right now. We're back right now in the information and incentives and assistance part of our strategy. And so benchmarking is a key example where we've mandated that building owners collect this information, they give it to us. But now our focus is really on, okay, how do we communicate back to building owners so that they understand how their buildings are performing, understand how they could cost effectively make improvements to their buildings, and then what is the assistance we need to provide to help them get that done. And depending on how how successful we are in those arenas, then we would talk about bringing on performance requirements. So I want to be clear that there aren't existing building performance requirements right now. We're taking baby steps towards it, and expect that by 2030 we've evolved there, but not by tomorrow.
Excellent. Next question. Are there strategies to partner with other communities, for instance, Tacoma, Bellevue, etc., to bring about the desired reductions in greenhouse gases?
Yes. And there's a number of good efforts around both the country and the local Puget Sound community. King County has taken the lead. That's the county where Seattle is. King County's taken the lead in creating a climate collaborative that brings together the county and jurisdictions here in King County to talk about collectively share what they're doing around climate. And now we're moving into what is a common agenda that we might want to set so that all cities can commit to achieving those goals. In addition, we do collaborate with Tacoma and other nearby communities on occasion, and I'm part of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. That's a network of directors like myself across the country, and we do a number of joint projects, collective innovation to try and share and learn from one another so that everyone is able to advance the best practices.
Okay. Next question. What kind of budget do you have for the Office of Sustainability and Environment?
So our budget, the Office of Sustainability, let me caveat this again, but I will mention what our office is. But again, I want to be very clear that much of the environmental work in the city is done by other departments, and so it's very important not to equate the Office of Sustainability's budget with kind of total commitment and investment by the city to our environmental programs. Our budget is just under $3 million and is mostly staff and professional services to advance our programs.
Okay. Have you considered existing building codes and zoning barriers to your program?
I'm not exactly sure I understand the question, but if I understand it correctly, certainly we are always looking at how we can improve our building codes and our energy codes to enhance our sustainability efforts. So for two examples, as I mentioned, Seattle has a very strong energy code, and we have a commitment. We control locally our commercial energy code, and we've set a policy that our local energy code will always be 30% more stringent than the state energy code. So there's that ongoing commitment to ratcheting up the energy performance of our new buildings. And so, if we'd let it stay static, it perhaps would be a barrier, but we've made a commitment to increasing that over time. Also, in our other building code, another example I will give where we've attempted to integrate sustainability into it, we adjusted the building code to require that new buildings now, new multifamily buildings, commercial buildings, are what we call kind of electric vehicle charging station ready. We don't require they install them, but that we've created the space and the conduit in the electrical systems that it could be installed later on. Because one huge barrier to adoption of electric vehicles would be if we cannot put in home charging or kind of local charging stations. So those are two areas where we're trying to improve our energy codes and our building codes to strengthen those. Zoning, obviously, and land use is constantly something that the city is working on, and there we really do rely on our comprehensive plan and the direction that's being set there around our urban village and urban center strategy, and there's a really strong commitment from our planning department to looking at how we change our zoning codes and our land use codes to ensure that we are creating the kind of complete communities that we are interested in seeing.
Next question asks, how did you engage racially diverse communities?
So obviously community engagement, racially diverse or not, is very difficult, especially when you're doing a planning process. And so, that's one of the areas that we worked really hard to have a conversation with the community. But it's not without its challenges. And I will confess that government is not the best communicators in the world. That said, we were very interested in getting beyond sort of what we call the choir in Seattle, the folks that turn out to every public meeting and comment, and recognize in particular that the city needs to go above and beyond with some communities that are not used to communicating with government and have other barriers that might make it difficult for them to attend a workshop. So for the Climate Action Plan, we did two different strategies. One, we worked with a media consultant, and we wrote articles, and we had them placed in all of the, or many of the ethnic newspapers in our community, and had them translated and worked. We did a series of 3 articles over the course of about a 6-month period, again trying to get our message out into news and community sources that we might not otherwise hit. And in addition to that media strategy, we worked with, the city has a program called the Public Outreach and Engagement Liaisons, and it's a program run through our Department of Neighborhoods. And the Department of Neighborhoods hires local community members to help engage their community groups or their communities in conversations with the city. And so we did two things. One, we had a kickoff meeting where we pulled together all of the public outreach liaisons, and each public outreach liaison is required or recruits their community to come. So it was a meeting of more than 200 people speaking 11 different languages to talk about the Climate Action Plan and to get their feedback early on in the process. Later in the process, when we were really had some strategies we wanted to bounce off the community, we re-engaged the public outreach liaisons, but this time we had individual meetings with 11 different groups and 9 different languages, I believe, where in their language we could have a community conversation about the work that we're doing, or we had a meeting with youth, really trying to recognize that there are certain types of groups in our community that we don't always do a great job reaching.
Excellent. As with everything, energy or information is power. On the $10,000 community grants, or do the grants to support climate action projects come out of the city's general fund, or is there a dedicated funding mechanism for that?
It comes out of the city's general fund.
Okay. Given the urgency of the climate crisis, does the city have intermediate targets for 2020 and 2030? And and there's a comment there, if we wait until 2050 to achieve these goals, this individual fears that it will be too late.
So yes, we do. We do have intermediate targets, and they're absolutely right. We certainly don't want to not have any sense of where we need to be headed before 2050. I do not have on the tip of my tongue what those targets are, but that we not only did overall emissions targets, but we also set targets for kind of indicators. So for example, vehicle miles traveled targets, passenger vehicle fuel efficiency targets, and so those are kind of the less driving, cleaner driving. So in addition to our greenhouse gas targets, we've also set targets around vehicle miles traveled and fuel efficiency, and we've done the same with each sector. So we do have 2020 targets and 2030 targets. I apologize, I can certainly circulate that with the other information in terms of what they are, but I don't know them off the tip of my tongue.
I'm sorry, next question. What's the cost for owners to track energy performance and report that to the city?
So it is, there's no cost for the energy benchmarking program. That it is EPA provides the portfolio manager as a free service to building owners, and so if a building owner chooses, they can do it themselves with no cost. We don't require building owners pay when they submit their information, so we're not collecting any fees associated with energy benchmarking at this time. That said, many building owners do choose to hire vendors to do that work for them, and I honestly don't know how much vendors charge, but that's not a requirement as part of our program.
Okay, next question. What is waste heat?
So waste heat is the heat that just is going up into the atmosphere. So a good example of that is the data center. Data centers, when you put a lot of computers together, they generate a lot of heat. And in order to keep the data center functioning well, they need to reduce the amount of heat or take that heat and get rid of it. So right now what data centers do is generally they run the air conditioning a lot, cool the air, and then jet the hot air out the top of the building or whatever. So the idea of waste heat is, can we figure out a way to take that heat out of the data center area, but rather than cooling it and sending it out into the atmosphere, can we capture it and use it to heat water, which then goes and provides heat to nearby buildings. So that's a good example. Another example, I did not know this until I started doing this work, but sewers provide, oddly, what we put in our sewers is actually quite warm, and that there's a pretty constant temperature of the stuff that travels through our sewer lines. And you can, there's technology now, we can tap into it and basically harvest the heat off of the sewer, and then the sewage continues moving forward at a lower temperature. But you can harvest that heat, and it's essentially free energy, free heat that currently we're just dumping out or sending to our wastewater treatment plant.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we've run out of time. So if we didn't have a chance to get to your particular question, you'll have an opportunity to submit it in a brief survey that will pop up at the conclusion of this webinar. Again, we'd like to thank Crescent Electric Supply Company and Stoneway Electric Supply Company for making this webinar possible. And Jill, once again, I'd like to thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you very much, Dick.
Okay, that'll do it. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.